tous et à toutes. Je suis Sue Montgomery, la mairesse de CDN-NDG. J'aimerais vous souhaiter la bienvenue à notre conseil ou votre conseil. J'aimerais reconnaître que nous sommes en territoire autochtone, laquelle n'a jamais été cédée. Je reconnais la nation Kanien'kehá:ka comme gardienne des terres et des eaux sur lesquelles nous sommes aujourd'hui. We respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future, and our ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the Montreal community. I encourage all of us to support and join our Indigenous brothers and sisters in the struggle to protect the lands and the waters of this earth. I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us online today. It's a sign that democracy is thriving. We've had a lot of meetings recently. So thank you for joining in. Unfortunately, we're still in the midst of COVID, so I want to reiterate to everyone as we enter the holiday season, s'il vous plaît, restez chez vous, lavez les mains, portez les masques. We will soon have the vaccines, but until then, let us all take care of one another by following the rules. We'll have plenty of Christmases and Hanukkahs and other celebrations to come if we all stay healthy and safe. Alors, j'aimerais vous présenter mes collègues, Monsieur Christian Arsenault de Loyola.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and thanks for joining us.
Mr. Peter McQueen de NDG.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here.
Monsieur Rotrand de Snowden.
Bonjour. Hello, everyone. Happy Hanukkah.
Et Monsieur Perez de Darlington.
Bonjour tout le monde. Hello, everybody, and happy first lighting of Hanukkah tonight.
Et Madame Popiano de Côte-des-Neiges.
Bonjour. Thank you to being with us and happy Hanukkah.
J'aimerais aussi présenter notre directeur d'arrondissement, Monsieur Stéphane Plante, et je vous invite de présenter vos collègues. Merci.
Oui, alors bonjour Madame la mairesse, Madame la conseillère, Messieurs les conseillers. Avec moi cet après-midi, Madame Geneviève Reeves, secrétaire d'arrondissement, Madame Julie Farado-Boulet, secrétaire recherchiste, et Madame Sonia Gaudreau, directrice des sports, loisirs, culture et développement social. Voilà.
Bonjour. Merci beaucoup. Alors, on va aller maintenant à l'adoption de l'ordre du jour. Je propose.
Et j'appuie.
Adopté. So, everyone's wondering, why are we having a special council meeting only a few days after our regular council meeting on Monday? Well, on Monday, CDN-NDG Borough Council officially approved our contribution of $839,900, or 8%, of a total of about $11.5 million to purchase the land adjacent to the NDG YMCA. This purchase will allow the Y to maintain activities in NDG, create a new park, and add more social housing. So this is great news for our borough and for the city. For this generous contribution, we expect that the YMCA will maintain programming, and NDG for many years to come. We have asked the YMCA to commit to stay in NDG for 7 years. This is a reasonable request. I have always maintained that a non-negotiable condition of purchasing the land was that the YMCA must remain in NDG. This is what residents expect and have requested of us. I made this clear to the YMCA numerous times. I also formally stated this position in a letter to Benoit Doré, President of the Executive Committee, on October 16, 2020. The YMCA had only provided us with a vague intention of staying, writing, "Nous avons l'intention l'intention de poursuivre notre action pour de longues années encore. I was not comfortable with this. That is why myself, along with colleagues Lena Perez and Marvin Rotron, adopted a motion asking the YMCA to commit to continuing a presence in NDG for 7 years. Christian Arsenault, Peter McQueen, and Magda Popiano disagreed. However, in the end, they still voted for the motion as amended. Mr. McQueen, Madame Popiano, and Mr. Arsenault soon flip-flopped and came to regret their vote They now argue asking the YMCA to maintain activities in NDG for at least 7 years in exchange for public funds is not a reasonable request. Je tiens fermement à ce que le YMCA reste à NDG, et ceci pas longtemps. Exiger que le Y maintienne ses activités à NDG pour les 7 ans est une demande raisonnable en échange de 10 millions de dollars d'argent public. Aujourd'hui, nous allons non seulement confirmer notre contribution monétaire, mais nous allons offrir au YMCA notre soutien total, que ce soit une aide logistique, notre expertise humaine, etc. Nous nous engageons à soutenir le YMCA d'NDG dans leur réflexion organisationnelle concernant l'offre de services à la population de Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. Le Y, c'est plus qu'un gym. Le Y a des programmes importants pour les aînés, les ados, les familles. Le YMCA abrite deux CPE. Il y a beaucoup de gens à NDG qui comptent sur le YMCA. Je défends la population de Côte-des-Neiges, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, qui veut que le YMCA reste à NDG. Je suis redevable envers vous, les résidents de notre arrondissement. J'ai toujours défendu les intérêts de Côte-des-Neiges NDG et je vais continuer à le faire en exigeant que le YMCA maintienne ses activités à Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. Le YMCA soutient Côte-des-Neiges NDG. Maintenant, à nous de soutenir le Y. Merci. Je passe la parole maintenant à... Excuse-moi, c'est... Est-ce que quelqu'un a la liste? Excusez-moi. Monsieur Gautran, avez-vous...
Thank you. I'll just have a few words to say about this and about other things. Just for those watching us, the city budget was adopted today. As far as I'm concerned, it's held together with Scotch tape, overestimates revenues, underestimates expenses. I think we're in big trouble. We are at record debt levels, and the possibility of a credit downgrade is real. I thank Christian Arsenault for having been honest with the council, not only about the needs of our borough and why he couldn't support our borough budget, even though he did vote for it 2 months ago when I voted against it, but also for voting against the city budget. I think there's lots of room for ponder. Projet Montréal used its majority. It's getting thinner and thinner all the time to just win this vote by a few votes. I think we will see change in 2021. As for the dossier in front of us today, I'm proud to support efforts to keep the Y in NDG, as NDG residents have clearly expressed their desire. A petition of well over 2,000 names of members and other residents of NDG want to see the Y stay, clearly urges the Borough Council to work towards a resolution in which whatever agreement comes to pass, the Y is committed here for the long term. And I'd like to thank Yusuf Montgomery for two things. One, when Lionel Perez and I noted that an Ontario agreement had nothing in it that actually made the Y stay in NDG after this land purchase went forward. And when the letter from the Y didn't actually say what they were committing to, how long they were committing to, or what services they were offering, leaving some vagueness that was created a lot of unease among people reading that letter. I'm glad that you came on board, because in the past we've had differences of opinion that played out at the borough councils. I'm glad that we were able, the three of us, to do something which I think is in the interest of NDGers. And I'm seeing in my own email, my Facebook, everything, people are contacting me saying, you guys did the right thing by proposing this amendment to improve the original motion. So I want to thank you for that. And I want to also thank you for quickly reacting to our colleagues who wanted the special meeting. They do have the right to call a special meeting. I understand the three of them come forward, and I think you responded quickly. Could have been tomorrow, could have been next week, but it's today, and they have the right to be heard. I won't be changing my vote. I will be staying in favor of what we adopted, which I believe is largely supported, and in no way provides any real impediment to the Y. If it wants to stay in NDG, it should be saying so, and we have done nothing to hinder this deal. I want to clarify for the public, what was voted was a land purchase, which was at a fair price to both parties, in which the city announced an intention in the long term to perhaps build some public housing on the site, perhaps, and to groom a park on the green space. We have no money in the short term, and we may well not see that for a few years, but in a neighborhood with so little green, the city's committed to saving that green space and then one day delivering it to the public. So I want to let everyone know I'm not going to be changing my vote, and the motion actually that we had last Monday, I'm very comfortable with that, and I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Autran. Madame Popiano?
Merci, Madame la mairesse. Écoutez, en premier, je tiens à vous dire, en dépit des opinions, je comprends, mes collègues sont en opposition, mais moi, personnellement, je suis très fière du budget qu'on a voté aujourd'hui, qui est un budget audacieux, un plan d'avenir, il est structuré. Vous avez vu, on a voté au comité exécutif de la Ville de Montréal hier, un plan stratégique de développement. Nous savons pertinemment dans quelle direction on y va et comment on investit l'argent. Alors, c'est en réalité un budget aussi pour l'avenir de notre ville, de notre arrondissement. Je vais prendre le temps un jour, pas aujourd'hui, parce que le sujet, il est le sujet à l'ordre du jour, il faut qu'on se donne le temps de le discuter, mais de défaire le verbatim de mes collègues à propos du définancement. J'ai regardé le PTI, vous savez, il n'a pas changé depuis 2013. La même chose pour le budget de fonctionnement. Je promets de me préparer et de vous faire une démonstration à propos de ces discours déchirants qui mènent la population en erreur. Parce que, en dépit de la pandémie, notre administration a fait un effort remarquable. Nous avons aussi essayé de régler les problèmes et toutes les dépenses liées à la pandémie, mais de regarder vers l'avenir. Nous avons aussi abordé tout au long de l'année non seulement la situation économique et sanitaire urgente, mais aussi tous les problèmes qui restent prioritaires, l'abordabilité en habitation. Et vous savez très bien, on avait acheté des terrains, on est en train de deux terrains, un pour des questions de mobilité, l'autre pour le logement. Donc, on prépare l'avenir en faisant des efforts considérables, mais aussi, on assure la durabilité environnementale. Vous savez très bien, la phase 2 de relance économique, la Ville a investi 60 millions de dollars de support. Et on obtient des résultats concrets. Je l'entends dans les SDC, je l'entends auprès de nos partenaires des industries culturelles et créatives. Toutes les grandes villes de l'Amérique du Nord ont eu une expérience de réduction de l'emploi. Mais je peux vous assurer que la Ville de Montréal, on a réussi à avoir la moindre baisse de ses effectifs. Si à New York, on avait perdu 10,7% de l'emploi. Boston a perdu 9,7%. Toronto a même perdu 2,7%. Nous sommes restés à 1%. Ce n'est pas rien. Donc, la réalité, elle est précaire. Mais pour une première fois aussi dans l'histoire de la ville de Montréal, on a un budget participatif de 10 millions de dollars. On l'a ouvert au public, proposé, amenez-nous nos projets. On a un plan de transition écologique. On a un règlement sur la mixité. Je sais, beaucoup de mes collègues ne partagent pas mes valeurs et ma croyance profonde que lutter contre la discrimination et le racisme, c'est d'offrir à des gens qui sont dans des situations très précaires un logement décent et abordable. Donc, moi, c'est une belle journée de ma vie. Je suis très fière du budget qu'on a voté. Je vais faire l'intervention sur le why quand vous appeliez le point à l'ordre du jour. Merci, Madame la mairesse.
Merci, Madame Popiano. Maintenant, c'est Monsieur McQueen.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here with us. So on the subject of today's meeting, the YMCA Accord, my understanding of the reason we're having this special meeting today is that we've received a legal opinion from the city legal department, Center City Legal Department, that states that it would be impossible anyways to enforce any clause which states that they have to stay open for 7 years or 10 or 20 or 30 years, the YMCA. Listen, we all want the YMCA to stay open. Of course, that is the goal. And I thought their letter, though vague about the number of years, was of good faith. I mean, I'm going to continue to take the YMCA at good faith, just like I take all the other community groups in NDG at good faith. There are many of them. We have many dealings with them, and I keep a good relationship with them, and that's an important part of my job. I listen, I talk, I suggest, and they've been in contact with me for suggestions, for ideas, all of which points in the direction that they want to stay open. But how would anybody like to be involved in a real estate deal where one party has agreed to it already, and then at the last minute starts adding more conditions? So one, there can be a bit insulted by the lack of good faith that Mayor Montgomery and Councillors Rocha and Councillor Perez show in them. Two, they see it as being blindsided because it was last minute. If these things had been brought up earlier, perhaps they could have been dealt with and things could have been explained, but it was at the last minute, séance tenante, at the meeting on Monday night. So now that we have this legal opinion, which we could not get because it was brought up at the last minute on Monday night, we feel it was important to make the point, make this legal opinion known to the community and give Mayor Montgomery and Councillors Perez and Rochon the chance to change their vote on this thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. Et maintenant, Monsieur Perez.
Merci, Madame la mairesse. Je parlais très brièvement sur l'adoption du budget qui a eu lieu, ça fait environ 1 heure. Et ensuite, je vais évidemment aborder l'enjeu du jour aujourd'hui sur le YMCA de NDG. C'est un budget qui aura des conséquences assez graves pour les Montréalais pour des années à venir. La mairesse a dit que c'était un budget COVID. The Mayor of Montreal, Valérie Plante, said this was a COVID-19 budget. If it's such a COVID-19 budget, why did she only put $5 million on the side to deal with COVID? In 2020, $85 million was the cost of COVID. And yet for 2021, only $5 million? I propose an amendment to put at least $25 million because some of the costs will not be recurring. It was voted down by Projet Montréal. Expenses. The mayor said this, Mayor Montreal and Mr. Doré said this was a budget which was the same amount of last year. Incorrect. From an accounting perspective, sure, at the top level it's the same amount, But when you just scratch the surface, you see that it's $166 million additional, 67 additional positions. In the year of COVID, a year we're supposed to tighten the belt, I'm sorry, it's continuing their spending ways. There is a deficit. It is an artificially balanced budget. There is a deficit. The own budget said so. In 2020, there's going to be about $100 million deficit for the city of Montreal. And 2021, what they did is they increased the revenue to make it look like they have more room to maneuver, and they underestimated the cost. Again, that's going to bite Montrealers in 2021. What's scary is that we are at the limit of our debt and our ability to be able to borrow, without which we're going to get ratings change. I'm not saying it. Moody's is saying it. It's saying if you get over 120% of your ratio of your of debt, then you're going to get a downgrade. We're at 120. We get to 121 and we're there. But perhaps I think what's most telling is how we had the opportunity to make small change. And I propose an amendment to equip the SPVM with body cams. And what we said is it's maximum $17 million from the capital works budget of the SPVM. Why don't we take from the $200 million that they want to spend on the site bicycle network and the REV? Why don't we just take 17 of that 200 million and then go ahead with the body cams? Because the mayor of Montreal has flip-flopped on it. She said, yeah, in fact, they are in favor of it. They just don't want to do it now. Guess what? It was voted down. So I think that unfortunately, we're going to get the financial statements next year about 2020. We're going to see exactly what I'm saying today is what the situation was. And then Projet Montréal and Valérie Plante are going to have a lot of explaining to do. Regarding the YMCA, it's a serious matter. No one is taking it lightly. We all what's in the best interest of the YMCA and NDG collectively. I hear a lot of things that have been said, and I'll get a chance to say it more in detail when we get into the actual subject matter. But people are under the impression that this council has been dealing with this file for months or for a year. I've been dealing it for under 2 weeks. City Center never made me a presentation, never gave me an update. They just gave me a file and they say, adopt it. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not a rubber stamp. I look at what's in the best interest of the community, of the citizens, what's reasonable, and I'll make a decision. I find it interesting also that we're getting all these words that this is, the deal's in jeopardy now. Let's all, calm down. Let's let the dust settle and then let's talk. I understand the why. They're not informed of the governance of Montreal. They've been dealing with City Center and the real estate department all this time. They don't know that it needs approval both from the executive committee and the borough council if borough council funds are going to be included. So that was nothing that was never communicated to them. So I understand where they think perhaps this came a little bit unexpectedly, but we have to make sure that we govern our thing. So I'm going to have more to say. I look forward to Mr. Peter McQueen tabling this supposed legal opinion. For us to pour conclure. Alors, I look forward to getting that legal opinion to be able to study it with much attention. Thank you. Merci, Madame la Mairesse.
Merci. Et Monsieur Osselin.
Merci, Madame la Mairesse. Je vais garder mes commentaires pour le point item à l'ordre du jour. Merci. D'accord.
Merci. Alors, on passe maintenant à 10.05, c'est ça? Je n'ai pas l'ordre du jour devant moi, mais Maître Reeves, c'est bien ça?
C'est 10.04, période de questions et de demandes du public.
Ouais.
Je vais expliquer un peu la procédure. Oui. Donc, la période est de 30 minutes. Les citoyens ont eu l'opportunité de poser des questions ou de donner des commentaires par écrit en remplissant le formulaire en ligne qui était prévu à cette fin jusqu'à 10 heures aujourd'hui. Les formulaires qui nous ont été acheminés après 10 heures aujourd'hui n'ont pas été pris en considération. 8 personnes nous ont soumis des questions et des commentaires. Nous avons remis aux élus et aux directeurs la liste des questions suivant l'ordre qui a été déterminé par tirage au sort et en respectant l'alternance homme-femme. Un maximum de 3 questions peuvent être soumises sur un même sujet. Les autres questions qui portent sur le même sujet pourront être soumises à la fin de la période de questions si le temps le permet.
Merci. So we're going to go to question period now. It lasts 30 minutes because it's only... S'il vous plaît, arrêtez le timer parce que... Ouais, merci. 30 minutes. People had until 10 a.m. this morning to submit their questions by online. And because it's a special council, we just have 30 minutes. We allow 3 questions on the same subject, and if we have time, we'll go back and answer the others. And the order is determined by a draw, and we alternate men, women. So with that, I will start. Merci. Number 1 is from Ray Taylor. On Monday, council voted to require the YMCA to stay in NDG for at least 7 years. Projet Montréal voted against this measure. Christian Arsenault, you initially voted against this with Projet Montréal. It is my understanding you have forced this extraordinary council meeting because you now want another vote on this matter. Now that you have recycled yourself as an independent and denounced Projet Montréal, will you put the needs of NDG ahead of partisan interests? Will you now vote to keep the YMCA in NDG for at least 7 years? If not, it is a shameful waste of taxpayer money and your colleagues' time to have called this useless meeting. Monsieur Arsenault.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Taylor, for the question. Let's try not to jump to conclusions. I voted against the amendment because it was sprung on us and on the YMCA at the last minute. No heads up, no, not so much as a courtesy call. And then I and Councilors McQueen and Pobianu voted for the amended resolution because we thought that an amended deal could be better than no deal at all. That being said, more information has come to light over the last couple of days to the effect that this does indeed threaten the entente between the city. The YMCA has expressed serious concerns and doubts. We have seen the extent to which the request was improvised at the very last minute, baselessly, no legal documentation to back it up. And frankly, we think it's irresponsible given the current context. We hardly know what's going to happen in 7 weeks, let alone 7 months. How can we possibly be in a position to demand that an institution that's struggling financially explicitly commit to 7 years? I think that's irresponsible. I think that it could backfire easily and get NDGers less than what this proposed deal offers, which is why I wanted us to rehash it with the new information on hand. As for the budget, well, you can listen to my budget speech in council. It's available on YouTube. And should you have any other further questions about the substance, then you're more than welcome to get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 2 is from Kirsten Voss. If the Y is not willing to commit to keeping the center running in the community, given the current zoning of the property, what other potential buyer could make an offer? I believe the land is currently zoned for sports, recreation, education, or community and cannot be developed. If the sale goes through, could the council also commit to not allowing buildings on the part of the land adjacent to Wellington School and the houses on Terrebonne in order to preserve the green space and avoid constructing additional access points? There are still ways the Y could easily access parkland if they actually stay in the community. Thank you for this question, Ms. Voss. You're absolutely right. That is the zoning for this land. So if there were to be any sort of development on it, it would require a zoning change from council. And of course, in order to get that, they would have to go through, any developer would have to go through the regular process, the CCU and so on. It's not something that happens overnight, a zoning change, if at all. And in terms of what would go there and where, we're not even there yet. I mean, we're just trying to the sale has been approved by the executive committee. It was on Wednesday, and will be approved, no doubt, by City Council on Monday. And of course, we approved it as well. So that's where we are right now. So whatever happens down the road, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, the next question.
I can add a
is-
little comment.
Yes,
Mrs.
Mr.
Voss, I would like to mention to you that, this dossier is going to move into the next mandate, perhaps into a future mandate after that. So it's not just dependent on the views of all the people on this council about how they would vote on zoning or dezoning the land. You do know that in the last Coder administration, there was talk on the part of their administration that they might take away the right of referendums of local residents. Hence, a potential buyer in some future mandate, a potential commercial buyer of the land could maybe build housing on it, turn it to for-profit residential development, and it not be referendable by the community.
Number 3, Mr. J. Bryan. Given that the Hampton Y is an important center for healthy physical activity and social interaction in NDG, but has been sadly neglected by YMCA Quebec for many years, how can the borough and the city leverage the proposed infusion of public funds into YMCA Quebec to help ensure that the Hampton Y remain open and receive badly needed renovation? Thank you, Mr. Bryan. Not only is it an important center for healthy physical activity, but also supports a lot of, or provides a lot of other services like after school care, daycares, teen programs, services for the elderly. So it's a very, very important institution. In fact, a community, it's an icon in our community. And so, this is just our point, is that the city and the borough collectively and the agglomeration is handing over $10 million plus tax to the YMCA with no guarantee that they are going to put any of that money into our local Y. And, they say they intend to stay, but this is why myself and my colleagues, Mr. Rochon and Mr. Perez, are asking for a commitment of 7 years. And as Mr. McQueen pointed out, that's not necessarily legally binding, but in our view, it would at least force them to give it the old college try to put some of that money into our community and into our local law. So, oops, there's feedback. Sorry, Madame Popiano, est-ce que vous pouvez fermer? Oui, merci. So this is our concern. I believe that the Y was acting in good faith, but we just want that little extra guarantee that they're not going to take the money and run. And this is the concerns we've heard from our residents. And I shared that skepticism with the YMCA in my discussions with them and told them, we're very worried as our residents that you're just going to take this money and go. And that's not what we want. So while we can't force them to do this, we would like some kind of commitment, and that's what we're looking for. Number 4 is from Lydia Pina. In light of the amount of money the borough and the city are paying for the land adjacent to the YMCA, and considering that the Y of Quebec has had to close 2 centers, therefore fueling distrust in their leadership, Y is asking for a 7-year commitment to remain in the community deemed unreasonable. Aren't tax-paying residents entitled to such a commitment in exchange for their hard-earned money? This is exactly our point, and this is why Mr. Perez, Mr. Rochon, and myself are doing this. So I'm going to throw this question. I think Mr. Arsenault would like I see you
Yes.
turned on your camera.
Thank you,
If you would like to answer why this is an unreasonable ask.
Thank you for the question. I think the mayor has been making an effort to frame this in a way that suggests that we're just possibly throwing $10 million down the drain. Let's not forget that for this $10 million, we are getting one of the last remaining undeveloped green spaces in all of NDG, in a city that has one of the lowest amounts of green space per capita in Canada, as well as land that could be used for the construction of much needed social housing in a borough where we have a waiting list that is thousands of people long. Okay, so we're not just throwing them a lifeline for $10 million. The whole community of NDG, not just YMCA members, but the whole NDG community will benefit from this. So we see the original proposal as a win-win-win, because we believe that the YMCA was negotiating in good faith. Tacking on conditions under the pretense that somehow we're looking out for the residents of NDG because somehow the original deal wasn't, is dishonest, and it's bad faith negotiation. What's also bad faith is the way it was done.
A point of privilege,
say
please,
at the
Mr.
last
Arsenault. Point
That's
of
at the
privilege.
last
It is
minute
not
without
dishonest.
so much as a courtesy call to anyone else involved in the negotiations. We'll talk about this a little bit more once the point comes up, but there you have
Mr.
it.
Arsenault, point of privilege. Can you withdraw your word dishonest, please?
Withdrawn.
Thank you. Okay, Gilles Chiasson. It seemed the issue with the YMCA was settled and they would be sure to properly reinvest in the NDGY. Now it's being revisited one more time. Can we be told in simple terms what the hang-up is? Hang-ups are, or hang-ups are. Yes, Mr. Chiasson, I know it can seem confusing, but you know, we as a council represent the citizens of NDG and Côte-des-Neiges, and they have told us loud and clearly that, you know, they're skeptical that the YMCA is going to get this money, and they're not going to invest any of it in our own community. So we just want a commitment. If, you know, they say their intention is to stay. So my feeling is it's not a stretch to ask for a commitment of 7 years. If, you know, I'm not sure what they're afraid of with that commitment. If, as Mr. McQueen noted earlier, there is it's not legally binding. It's not like we're going to pull back on the deal if in 5 years they leave. But we want them to commit to maintaining a presence in our borough for 7 years at least. And I think that's a very reasonable ask for in exchange for 10 million. So that's what we're trying to determine today. All of us voted in favor of this amendment on Monday. And here we are back again because my Projet Montréal colleagues disagreed. So, Lisa Guardhouse, at your last meeting, Y amended motion was adopted unanimously. You promised that the city would carry out services for at least 7 years in our YMCA. Apparently, after your meeting, you immediately set today's meeting in order to renege on your promise. My questions are simple. Why did you do this? How can we trust you if you go back on your word so easily? Thank you, Ms. Guardhouse. I'm not going back on my word. What I'm actually doing is reiterating our commitment and our support for the YMCA. We are telling them that if they stay, we are here to support them. We can provide professional services. Perhaps if the YMCA building isn't big enough, there would be other spaces in the borough that we could work out for providing services. So what we're doing here is just reiterating our commitment as a strong partner with the YMCA. And so we are not going back on our word at all. Mr. Arsenault?
I was going to answer the question, but I'm kind of blown away by what I just heard. I'd be curious to know what kind of spaces the mayor is suggesting we offer the YMCA. Perhaps we could offer them the location of the NDG Food Depot. Oh, wait a second. They're operating out of a restaurant and an old bank. Maybe we could have them shack up with the Loyola Center.
Point of order.
Maybe we could have them shack
Point
up
of
with the
order,
Loyola Center. Wait
Mr.
a second.
Arsenault.
The
Mr.
Loyola
Rica has a
Center is
point of
operating
order.
out of a
Mr.
parking
Arsenault.
lot. So-
You're out of order right now.
This is a little
I'm point
preposterous.
of order, and I did not do so for a whim. You are debating the motion now, not answering the citizen's question, all right? You didn't like Ms. Montgomery's answer, but you're not involved in answering the citizen. I would suggest if you want to make that point, you make it during your speech. There are 3 other people. They have the right to be heard in priority to the councillors getting involved in arguments and different points of view. I respect your right to not agree with me, but at this point, you're premature. And that's why I made this point of order.
Point of order, Madam Mayoress. If maybe Councillor Rocha may be right, but I want that rule applied equally at all our future meetings.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to answer the question, Mr. Arsenault?
The answer to the question is that nobody wants to renege on their word. The concern that I and my 2 colleagues from Projet Montréal have is that we were not given sufficient time or information to actually properly and responsibly consider this request. And the way that it was brought up, without even giving the YMCA a heads up, was a bad faith negotiating tactic.
Okay, question number 7 is from David Glashan. On Monday, council voted to require the YMCA to stay in NDG for at least 7 years. Projet Montréal councillors voted against the measure. Peter McQueen, as my city councillor, can you explain exactly why it is that 7 years is an unreasonable commitment in exchange for $10 million of our money? Mr. McQueen?
Yes, I don't think I would want a lot more than 7 years for $10 million of our money. And we are getting a lot more than 7 years. The agreement we have with the YMCA is we get the land, a brand new park in the middle of NDG, and enough space for some social housing on the lot as well. And they're staying open, and hopefully for much more than 7 years. They want to stay open indefinitely into the future. So that's what we get for $10 million.
Okay, number 8, Barbara Sidorowitz. Christian Arsenault, you have been hypercritical of Sue Montgomery's assertion that the borough is underfunded. Now you agree the borough is underfunded. Was quitting Projet Montréal about this, or personal career advancement, or do you suddenly care about the residents of Loyola, which you haven't in a long time, including voting against keeping the police station in NDG?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Ms. Sidorowicz, I think we just need to call things as they are, which is that you've been unhappy with me ever since I took Projet Montréal's side following Sue Montgomery's expulsion from the Projet caucus. I remember seeing you at council. I remember the way you looked at me that first council after her expulsion, and that's fine. That's legitimate. But let's remember that when I was arguing over the past several months with Mayor Montgomery over the budget, it's not because I disagreed that there was underfunding. It's because I disagreed with the shallow reasoning that got her to that conclusion and her inability to provide any additional context, evidence, or support for the arguments that she had made to downtown. Because, as she herself admitted when she submitted documents to council on that topic, she did not do much to actually support these claims downtown. A couple of letters, a couple of council questions here and there do not count. That is unserious work. So keep in mind that the mayor that you are defending only started speaking out more after she got expelled. I left of my own accord. Those are 2 very different things. And if you want to have a sensible and nonpartisan discussion about the budget and what we really need to do to fix our financing, then the door is always open. You're a constituent, and I will be more than happy to have that conversation with you. But please, let's try to avoid baseless and partisan oversimplification.
Thank you. So that c'est la fin des questions. On passe maintenant à Oui,
C'est
Maître Reeves.
10.05, période de questions des membres du conseil.
Est-ce que quelqu'un a des questions?
Oui.
Yes, I have hand up, Madam Mayor.
Yeah, hold on, let me look at the hands. Okay, Mr. Arsenault?
To come back around to my reaction to the citizens' question, I would like to know which facilities you plan on offering the YMCA in collaboration, given that, as you and I have both noted over the years, we have a dearth of community space as it is. I'd like to know, will they shack up with the Loyola Center in the Gilbert Layton Park Chalet? Will they take up shop in the Trenum Center, which is close to falling apart? I'd like to know what your intentions are.
Mr. Arsenault, before I answer your question, I find your tone very disrespectful, and I would ask you to be a little bit less condescending and sarcastic. I would.
Mayor, question of privilege. Question of privilege. You
Go
tend
ahead.
to criticize my tone every time I say or ask something that you particularly don't agree with or that you have difficulty answering. Just because I'm asking a tough question does not mean that I'm being condescending. It does not mean that I'm being sarcastic. It means that I do not accept what you're saying and I'm challenging you on it. There's a
I
big
understand that, and I hear your question, but you can say it in a respectful tone. Thank you. What I would say is that we have services. Madame Gaudreau does an excellent job, and she would work together with the YMCA like she does with all our community groups to work out what their needs are and how we can best support them. But if they leave, of course, they won't need the facilities. Anyone else have a question?
Yes.
Yes, I do. Sorry, go ahead,
Marvin
Peter.
Rocha?
I think okay.
Peter
the,
McQueen, no, Mr. Rocha is next, Mr. McQueen, I think.
All right. My question is to Peter McQueen. Today, City Council had an important debate about police body cams. I joined Lionel Perez and Christian Arsenault in voting in favor of body cams for our police officers. I believe there's a big consensus among the population that it would restore public confidence. It would create a permanent record where we would be able to see in cases where somebody might get shot, whether the circumstances for the use of force were justified or not. It's a guarantee for the police officer and also gives transparency for the citizens. You voted against. Can you explain why you're against body cams?
Yes, thank you for the question, Councillor Rocha. Yes, I joined Mayor Fumigalia of Saint Michel Park Extension, Villeray. And because the word I'm getting from a lot of groups interested in defund the police and legal groups who look very closely at police issues is that body cams are not actually helpful to the situation. I'm not saying that's definitively. I'm still looking at that debate, but I'm hearing it from several sides. It clearly so is, for example, Mayor Fumigalia. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. I realize that was the reason you voted against, because you feel the defund police people, some of whom don't feel that body cams are valid. It seems to be a very valid exercise elsewhere.
Point of order, Madam Mayor. I wasn't aware that this was a question and debate session. I thought it was just a question period.
Oh, poor Christian. I know you
Is
haven't.
that a Mr. Rotron? Mr. Rotron, please be respectful. Did you have a follow-up question for Mr. McQueen?
I was about to ask it, and there was nothing in my tone to suggest I was needling either Mr. McQueen.
Okay. Can you
Mr.
ask?
Well, now I'm so distraught, and my train of thought has been disrupted.
Okay, can you just ask your...
I need a moment to compose myself, so I'll come back after Peter McQueen's question.
Okay, Mr. McQueen, do you have a question?
Oui, bonjour. Oui, j'ai une question pour vous, Madame la mairesse. Le service des affaires juridiques de la Ville-Centre nous a écrit quelque chose qui expliquait les 3 options et le fait que le 7 ans ne pourrait pas être enforcé. Notre directeur d'arrondissement l'a reçu, je crois, hier, mardi peut-être. Alors, est-ce que vous pouvez déposer ça? C'est à ça que je référais.
Non, je n'ai pas reçu aucune opinion légale.
OK. Ben, est-ce que vous... OK. Alors, est-ce que je peux demander, M. Plante, est-ce que vous avez reçu cette lettre et est-ce que vous pouvez le déposer, s'il vous plaît?
Écoutez, je vais devoir vérifier et peut-être Mme Gaudreau ou Mme Reeves, je peux vérifier, mais je ne crois pas avoir reçu de lettre dans ce sens-là. Moi, en tout cas, je peux revérifier, là, mais je ne crois pas avoir reçu de lettre. Madame Reeves?
Moi non plus.
Moi, ça ne me dit rien du tout.
OK, on va vérifier ça. Parfait, merci.
Just as a follow-up, Mr. McQueen, I believe I asked you for a legal opinion. I asked Mr. Arsenault for a legal opinion on Monday, and there was none forthcoming. So, who is next? Mr. Arsenault?
I believe I was next, unless I'm mistaken.
Okay,
Madam
yeah,
Mayor.
sorry. Mr.
Can I ask my colleagues if they've finished with their questions to remove their
hands,
hands?
Mr. McQueen?
Please. I don't know if that's the case, but it'll be easier, I think, for ourselves and for the Madam Mayor to be able to manage things. I have a follow-up question based on Mr. Rotron's question to Mr. McQueen. So my question is to you, Peter. I understand. So you voted because you believe that the literature is not clear as to its effectiveness, and that's the reason that you just stated. I understood. My question is then, why is it that the administration, Madame Bourgeois, said they are in favor, but just not right now? So you seem to be going further than the responsible for public safety, who said she wants to do it, but she doesn't want to commit to it. You're actually questioning whether it's good. Is that correct?
That is correct. And it is a developing file. So my opinion has, as I see new information and literature on this important subject, just like I'm interested in all information about switching, defunding the police to some extent, and what services we could potentially shift it into. These questions interest me.
Okay. So, Mr. Rotron, did you have
I've managed to recover from the trauma of being interrupted mid-sentence. So I'm going to ask Mr. Queen a sort of sub-question from the budget. Mr. Queen, you also voted against another amendment which wouldn't have reduced or added to the police budget, but would have made $1 million in that budget available for socio-communitary responses, for specialized teams that deal with the homeless. Can you explain why you voted against that? Are you opposed to these specialized teams and their efforts to have a response to certain drug dependency and homelessness problems rather than sending armed officers who aren't trained in that? Was there a particular reason why you voted against that?
Obviously, you're referring to what has happened at the Campement Notre Dame this week, or earlier last week. And as I'm proud of what Projet Montréal has done for the homeless, and we've done a lot of very systematic, long-term, thought-out things. It took a lot of preparation for the last months and years. And of course, the campement had to be evacuated on the orders of the security and fire chiefs, as you know. Obviously, if somebody had burned to death in their tent, that would be a horrible tragedy, and people would be holding us accountable. So I'm just saying, I don't think some last minute $1 million on one particular thing is the solution to the homeless problem. It's a systematic policy like Projet Montréal is putting in place.
No, that's not what I was asking, Mr. McQueen. I was asking about Ms. Black's amendment in council last night, in which she proposed to take $1 million that's lying in the general police budget and give it to the specialized IMRI and ESUP teams that already exist to beef up their capacity to respond to crises that deal with persons who may have a mental health issue, who are not necessarily violent, or with someone who is homeless who's having a particular issue. And instead of 2 armed police officers going, the specialized team would go. It seemed to me modest the amount of money, but reasonable the proposal. You voted against, and I'm not sure why. It had nothing to do with the fact that 200 police officers showed up on the encampment on Notre Dame Street to remove the 40 homeless people there. I'm not asking about that. I'm asking about the actual council vote on the amendment last night in council, which you voted against.
Well, I see it as somewhat linked, because we are dealing with the homeless is a serious issue, and Projet Montréal has a systematic series of measures to deal with the homeless, and we're not just going to go pell-mell on one tiny thing just because one councillor in city council suggests it.
Mr. Arsenault?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I believe this will be my last question. You stated in your opening comments that you have always maintained that the YMCA staying in NDG for a certain number of years was a non-negotiable condition for you. Is that correct? I didn't mishear. I didn't misunderstand you.
I don't think I said that it was a non-negotiable. I said that we talked about it with Mr. Vaillancourt.
You said that you talked about it and that you would put it as a demand in your letter to Benoit Doré.
Yes.
Yes. Well, I'm looking at your letter to Benoit Doré right now, and I don't see that demand anywhere. And I was wondering if you could perhaps point me to the correct paragraph in which
I don't have the letter in front of me.
I can give you time. I'm in no rush.
Well, I suggest we go on with the next point, and if you're going to respond to him, you respond to him sometime during the meeting rather than us having a 50 break.
Yeah.
Sure. I eagerly await a response. Thank you.
Pardon me?
I said, sure, we can go on, and I eagerly await a response.
Okay. So we will go on to Maître Reeves. Were there any more questions? No, nobody's hand is up. Excusez-moi, Maître Reeves, allez-y.
Donc, on est rendu au point 20.01. Réaffirmer avec amendement le texte de la résolution CA20 170323 du conseil d'arrondissement du 7 décembre afin d'approuver un projet d'acte par lequel la Ville de Montréal acquiert les YMCA du Québec aux fins de parc et de logements sociaux et communautaires, un terrain vacant, superficie 8 919,7 mètres carrés, entre l'avenue Hampton et Mont-Royal, au nord de Mont-Plune, dans l'arrondissement.
Et je propose.
Est-ce que j'ai un appuyeur?
Je vais l'appuyer.
Madame Popiano?
Excusez-moi, c'était moi qui étais l'appuyeur. J'avais un problème technique, alors je demanderai que mon nom s'inscrit comme l'appuyeur.
OK. Et Madame Popiano, voulez-vous parler, non? J'ai vu votre main, non?
Non, Madame la mairesse.
OK, excuse-moi. Monsieur Arsenault?
Ben, je reviens à la charge par rapport à ma question. Je suis en train de déposer la lettre que vous avez envoyée à M. Doré, que je réussirai à faire dans quelques minutes. Et j'aimerais que vous nous disiez où, dans la lettre, vous avez exigé une durée précise pour le YMCA de rester à Notre-Dame-de-Grâce.
Okay. Monsieur Gautran? Monsieur Gautran?
Oui, merci. Nous sommes ici pour défendre l'intérêt des citoyennes de Côte-Neige, Notre-Dame-de-Grâce. C'est notre premier devoir. Le YMCA Québec est un organisme autonome avec lequel il y a une entente que nous avons entérinée lundi dernier. Nous ne sommes pas ici comme des gens qui travaillent pour le YMCA, ni des lobbyistes pour le YMCA. On est des élus qui défendent l'intérêt de nos citoyens. Ce qui a été voté lundi dernier est une transaction qui est dans l'intérêt des deux parties. Les deux parties étaient d'accord pour entrer dans une transaction parce que chacune gagne quelque chose de valeur. Premièrement, nous n'étions pas ici seulement pour acheter ce terrain. Nous avons indiqué à la population que l'achat va servir pour certains besoins. Peter McQueen on his Facebook last weekend basically said, well, it's going to lead to the following. There'll be public housing and there's going to be a park, and made it seem like this is a short-term thing. I want to stress for those watching us, those are our long-term objectives. It's not going to happen tomorrow. First of all, there is no entente for public housing. There was a sketch, a drawing some discussion. There's no funding for it. We don't even know if it does go forward, where on the site it's going to be. There was a suggestion that we just put out there showing people what would possibly happen. And I want to reiterate again that there is no park in the short term. Even if we become the owners tomorrow, there is no park in the short term. There is a green space that will still be available to those who use it currently, which is mostly the clientele of the YMCA, and they will still have the right to use it. But in terms of what most people think of as a local park, it won't be groomed, having new equipment, possibly a chalet for years to come. And on top of that, we don't have the money. So let's look at the structure of the deal. We put in 839,000, I think. The total amount was a little over 11 million. That covers all fees, taxes, and the Y will pocket 10 million. But the agreement, as you, Lionel Perez, and I noted and stated, has nothing to legally bind the activities of the Y. Mr. McQueen in his Facebook, I think, gave the impression that somehow we were saving the Y and its services and it was going to stay there. The preoccupation that NDG residents seem to have is they want the Y to stay as a fundamental community institution that provides valuable services that so many enjoy. That's why a petition was able to raise over 2,000 names in the short term. But however, the notarial agreement makes no mention of the Y providing services in NDG. By selling the land, they're not obliged to stay in their current location. They're not obliged to provide the services they do now. And even if they do decide to do that, there's nothing in there that says how long they're going to stay there. They have the complete liberty to leave. The file, which included the deal with the City of Montreal, which is paying most of the money for this deal, outside our purview, already been adopted by the executive committee, basically has a one-page letter that indicates a willingness of the Y to stay in NDG, hopefully for the long term. Hopefully was in there. Really give NDGers a reassurance, which is why so many of us, I'm sure it's the same for you as it is for me, are hearing from people by phone, by Facebook, by email. The questions today say it as well. I'm understanding that the citizens really care less about the purchase of the land than keeping the Y at its location, and feel the amendment that was adopted on Monday, which supposedly is in the sense of what the Y says it wants. It says it hopes to stay in NDG, which invites it to stay in NDG for a 7-year period, and which seems to have the overwhelming support of the citizens, seems to be causing some problems for some of my colleagues. I don't believe that this deal will fall apart if the amendment, which asks the Y to show how that it is sincere indeed about its hope to stay in NDG, it remains within the motion. Now, I think we're just voting on reaffirming. So the council has two choices today and only two. It either reaffirms the motion or it defeats the motion. That is my understanding of what can happen, because the motion itself is not up for redebate. The only thing that is being debated is, do we reaffirm our vote or do we overturn our vote? So the options in my mind are, do we continue our support for purchasing the land and our wish that the Y stays for 7 years, or do we overturn our vote and we say we do not wish to spend our $839,000? Those are the two options in front of us, and as far as I'm concerned, it's a fair deal for this borough. The park will ultimately be a local park, so we'll have paid $839,000 for a 10 million piece of land. Indeed, it's one thing Peter McQueen can say to his constituents that the city did, while it didn't really give us a lot of money, and that provoked Christian Arsenault leaving the caucus of the majority party this week. Well, at least we got them to pay for the green space, but we're going to have to find the $3, $4, $5 million in the future to make it into a real usable public park. So in terms of value, we got a value. And Y is getting a value as well. And I don't think our saying they should stay for 7 years in any way is going to convince them not to take the $10 million. I think it's a good deal for them. And I'm not even sure, because I haven't actually heard from the Y any indication that they're unhappy with the motion or that they are ready to break the deal. And in fact, I'm surprised that Mr. McQueen was able to refer to a legal opinion, which nobody has seen, because generally the contentieux de ville doesn't give councillors legal opinions. So I'm really curious about this. And usually those type of things aren't actually rendered public at a borough council meeting because there may be liability for the city to do so. So I'm a bit surprised. And I'm not even actually sure what it is that my colleagues want. Do they want us not to buy the land? I'm going to oppose that if that's the line that they're pushing. I'm comfortable with the purchase. All of us are councillors for the entire borough and not just for our own districts. When it comes to large amounts of public money, we all have an equal vote, whether it's spent in our district or somewhere else in the borough. And I would hope that all of us have a borough-wide vision, that citizens, no matter whether they live in Darlington or Loyola, Snowden or NDG or in Côte-des-Neiges district, they all have rights to the same quality type of services. And one of the things I think I have been saying for years, even though I'm not the councillor for NDG, is there is a dearth of usable green space in NDG. It has the lowest per capita of hectares of green space per population, not only in our borough, but just about in the whole city. So having a public park there would enhance the quality of life in NDG. I think you used the word family friendly last time, somebody used it, and it's a good word. It would really be a benefit. So I'm not going to vote to undo our purchase of this land from the YMCA. And guess what? I don't think in any way that the Y will want to tear up its deal with the City of Montreal. Now, I do realize the City of Montreal can decide to go around us in the sense that they can decide to give the Y the $839,000 that we're giving them, and the city would pay for it, and the city could remove the obligation for the Y to stay in the neighborhood. I would certainly hope they don't do that, even though we would save $839,000 if they did do that, simply because I think the Y is such a valuable service, and I would like to keep it in NDG for the long term. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roton. Mr. Arsenault.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There's a fair bit to unpack there from what Councillor Roton said, so I will. I'd first like to address something that he said regarding who would pay for the green space. Indeed, I suppose it's possible that if council decides to throw sticks in the wheel of this deal, then downtown could come in and make up for this last minute condition. But let's just be clear, the motion, the resolution that was passed the other night is not binding on the Y in any way. It's binding on the borough. It ties the borough's hands for a deal that gets us a new park for a grand total of $839,000. Think of it that way. It was a win-win-win for everyone. It would have helped the Y maintain programming, but it also, and let's not underemphasize this, would have allowed us to acquire one of the last remaining green spaces in NDG for $839,000. A deal like that comes around once in a generation, okay? So food for thought for all of those listening in. Once again, I come back to my question. I tabled the letter that Mayor Montgomery wrote to Benoit Doré. And contrary to her assertion, not 15, 30 minutes ago, nowhere, maybe I skipped it over, maybe maybe my eyes are betraying me, but I have not seen anywhere in this letter that the mayor has asked Benoit Doré to maintain a certain duration of time for service provision as a condition of the deal. Madam Mayor, can you answer that question? Can you address that inconsistency in your own account, please?
I will, even though that's not what we're debating right now. And also, I'd just like to ask you the question, are you here to represent your residents, or are you here to fight with me? Because it feels like
I'm less
just want to
interested
fight.
in rhetorical questions, and I'd be much more interested in getting an answer to my question that is actually relevant to the file.
Because it sure seems you want to fight. OK. Je crois fermement qu'il serait essentiel de travailler ensemble pour arriver à une solution qui gardera le why pour les générations à venir. So it's not even like 7 years, it's many generations. And then at the last paragraph, I say, l'arrondissement de CDN-NDG souhaite devenir votre partenaire dans ce projet. Nous serions prêts à contribuer un montant financier important pour la réalisation de ce projet pour sauver ce pilier de notre communauté. So, while it, I don't know how you interpret that, but I say that we want to save it and we want it here for generations to come. So I'm not going to debate that anymore because it's not part of the motion that's before us. So if anybody else...
Due respect, Madam Mayor, I'm going to debate it more because it is relevant to the motion, because it reinforces the fact that the initial resolution and amendment, specifically the initial amendment that was sprung on us on Monday, was baseless, and the justifications for it are baseless. What you just read to us was not a statement of a condition. It was a letter declaring your hope as the mayor of our borough, which I agree with. We all agree with. But nowhere did you say that you wanted a firm 7-year or any other year commitment. You said essentially the same thing that the YMCA said in their letter to the city, their letter of engagement, where they said that they want to maintain their service offering pour de longues années à venir. You were just as vague as they were. So how can you call your letter a demand for a concrete engagement, a specific engagement that is in no way mentioned in any of the texts, but then you can accuse their letter of being inaccurate, imprecise, and allowing them to potentially wiggle away with $10 million. How do you explain that inconsistency? Because it is absolutely relevant to what we're discussing right now. It's a double standard.
My intention in that letter was clear, that I wanted the Y to stay. And since this became public and Mr. McQueen put it all over his Facebook page, I was contacted by a lot of residents, very skeptical that the YMCA would take the money and run. So in my talks with Mr. Vaillancourt, I was very honest with him. I said, I'm telling you right now that my residents think we're being hoodwinked and that you're going to take this money. You have no intention of putting any of it into the Y, because they weren't even open. They weren't even honest and transparent with their members. They kept them in the dark. So the members were always calling me saying, what's going on? What's going on? So I was very clear with Mr. Vaillancourt that I wanted a commitment. And then when Mr. Perez, who hadn't been in these talks, came up with this amendment, I thought, why not? Why not? Because if the Y is so committed to staying, why would it kill them to say 7 years? It's not a big thing. I mean, most marriages last longer than 7 years. So, Mr. Perez, you have a comment.
I just have a question, Madam Mayor. Mr. Arsenault is obviously free to speak as he wishes, and I understand that he's appreciating the newfound freedom that he has by leaving from Projet Montréal, and he's trying to make a point of proving something that you said or didn't say or promised or didn't promise, and his is prerogative. I don't want to impede on his ability to to ask whatever questions. I think there's more important fish to fry. I think that we should get to the crux of the issue. Do we want as a council to reaffirm the condition that we would like the YMCA to stay for a commitment of 7 years in NDG? That's what the vote is about. That is what we voted out on Monday. Let's debate on that. I invite my colleagues to, debate on that. Of course, everybody's free to handle their time. And after everybody's spoken, I'll give the droit de réplique. Thank you very much.
Mr. Rocha?
Okay. I've looked at your letter, which I hadn't seen before. I don't recall anyways, but it's irrelevant to the debate in front of us today.
Right.
Back in October, it wasn't clear that the City Executive Committee and majority party would go for a deal. Your letter reflects what Mr. Prez was saying independently, what I was saying independently, what residents were saying. Hey, the Y could leave and we want it to stay. Your letter says it would be a good deal if we got hold of the land, we could use it for different functions. It's not for you to determine all the conditions there. Well, like a preliminary letter to get the ball rolling. So I don't understand how that somehow invalidates the vote that happened on Monday. Let's be clear, this council is sovereign. And despite the fact that some people in the majority party may have had more information than Lionel Perez and I do as councillors who are not sitting with the majority, we have just as much legitimacy to vote and to make amendments we see fit on anything that's proposed that is within the jurisdiction and purview of this borough council. $839,000 of our money is not insignificant for a borough council. It might be very small change for the city of Montreal, but however, a deal from Center City in which the bureaucrats say, well, here it is, does not mean that we become transformed into rubber stamps and that's the end of it. We immediately saw the weakness of this. And the weakness was that, hey, the Y isn't bound anywhere. And in fact, that letter, Mr. Arsenault's table from November, which also appeared in the file on Monday night, doesn't in any way make a firm black and white commitment for a long-term presence. Even our amendment has some flexibility because we do not say in that amendment that they must necessarily be in the same building. But in terms of the first question that was asked you by Mr. Arsenault, it's not for you or the borough should the Y want to relocate elsewhere in NDG or buy another building for us to do that for them or necessarily be even part of a financial montage. We could be if it's advantageous to us, but however, it's not our responsibility. So I felt that question was a bit out of order as well. The reality is it illegitimate for us to express the desire of our citizens that the Y stay for the long term? If it is correct that there's a legal opinion saying it's not enforceable, there's no problem. We've just expressed our desire. So why would we be called to a special meeting to knock that out? Why would Peter McQueen not want to be on the side of the angels and say, hey, I want black and white written that I want the Y in there for 7 years? He voted against that amendment on Monday night, but then he came back and voted for the motion as amended. And I would invite him again to vote in favor of this motion today, and that'll be the end of it. Because the other option is that we withdraw our purchase, our commitment to put our $839,000 into this. And I think that would be a mistake. I agree with my new colleague who sits next to me on my right at City Council, Christian Arsenault, who said green spaces are rare in NDG and this is a good deal. So let's vote to reaffirm our previous vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arsenault.
I understand that Councillors Perez and Rotron were perhaps I could say less in the loop. Being opposition councillors, that's kind of part of the business. What surprises me about this and the reason why I've been asking the question about the mayor's positioning and lobbying, supposed lobbying, is because we saw this amendment that definitely looks and sounds quite reasonable on spec. If I were an NDGY member, my membership lapsed a while ago, but if I were a member and I saw that, I would say, yeah, that makes sense. But when the mayor says that she's supporting that amendment and that requirement because she had already asked for it in private, I don't see any proof of that. So when we woke up to this amendment and realized, well, this is not usually the way that a public institution does business with its valued partners. So surely this couldn't have just been sprung on the YMCA. Surely Mayor Montgomery has been going on for weeks about how she's been in constant contact with the YMCA. This does not at all look like constant contact and good partnership and good faith with the YMCA. I'm surprised for someone who, especially over the past year, has constantly beat the drum of, I'm looking out for the interests of NDG. Do you really think that the best way to do that is to pull a fast one on the institution that you're trying to strike a deal with? So beyond that, I return to my answer to one of the citizens' questions. And again, to the people who are watching and to the people who are asking, I feel your concern. I don't want to see the NDGY close, but we're in a situation where the YMCA was already having financial difficulties before COVID. Now we've had one of the wackiest years in our lifetimes. My lifetime for sure, possibly Mr. Rotron's lifetime as well. And we don't know what will happen in 7 weeks' time, let alone 7 months. How can we suddenly tack on a rider to this deal that says you have to commit to us for 7 years? Like, no organizations are looking at 7 years down the road right now. Our local businesses are not looking 7 years down the road right now. Our community groups are not looking 7 years down the road right now because we are in a crisis and everyone's just trying to make ends meet. To tell an organization that's going through not one crisis, but two, that we're now asking you to look way down the road and commit to this when we don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow is, the only term that comes to mind is bad faith. And let's not forget also, this is not some rapacious private corporation that's only looking out for its bottom line. It's a longtime community institution. And while some of the members can rightfully reproach it for the lack of communication throughout the COVID crisis, the fact of the matter is this is a nonprofit community institution that's been in NDG for decades. And I don't think that we can negotiate on the baseline of we don't trust them not to take the money and run, not least when our borough mayor herself has been elbowing her way into the negotiations as much as possible. And if she has been making it clear that we were going to ask for this and that had to be factored in earlier on, well, she didn't do it in writing. She didn't do it formally. She's saying she did, but her own letter disproves her. So I do think it's highly pertinent. I respect Mr. Perez's claim that, maybe we have bigger fish to fry. I think this is a big fish. I think this is about us being able to trust that our borough mayor did what she said she does. And I don't think this is the way to negotiate. Not in a crisis.
Thank you, Madame Tropiano.
I'm sorry, Madam Mayor, I wasn't quite finished. So I don't think this is the way to negotiate in a crisis, not with a valued community partner. If this was some private company that was just trying to make a quick buck, I would understand. I'd be completely on board. And I think that if that were the case, the city would have played more hardball from the beginning. But this is a partner. So either we can make our partners' lives more difficult by throwing in this uncertainty when they can barely think about next year, let alone 7 years from now. Or we can trust them that despite some poor communication over the last several months, that they really do mean what they say in their letter, and that they detail in their letter, not just in terms of timeline and duration, but they detail the different models that they have that they'd like to introduce in NDG and things that could work to improve the service offering in NDG, which is why I tabled that letter as well, so that the public can read it. They don't just write a one-line letter and say, we want to keep our facilities in NDG. They detail the different approaches that they could use to maintain the service offering in NDG. That means they've put in thought to it. There's intention there. There's good faith there, which is more than I can say for the behavior of the mayor. Now, I understand, again, Councillors Perez and Rochon had less information. That's fine. That's well within their rights to try and throw their weight around. I don't hold it against them. But I really do expect better of the borough mayor on this.
Mr. Arsenault, a point of privilege, please. Can you please withdraw the fact that your statement that I wasn't acting in good faith?
We've been saying good faith and bad faith nonstop for the last.
No, you just said that I'm not acting in good faith.
I don't consider that to be a good faith negotiation.
No, I don't find that you're in good faith right now.
I don't consider that to be a good faith gesture, and I will not retract it.
Wow. Okay, Madame Popiano.
Merci, Madame la mairesse. Donc, je souhaitais aussi apporter mon grain de sel dans ce dossier qui est devenu tellement politique et émotif, et seulement rassurer les résidents du NDG que nous avons travaillé vraiment d'arrache-pied avec le YMCA Québec, surtout, pour trouver une solution permanente et de sauver l'offre de services du Y à NDG, aussi de créer un parc, de répondre aux besoins de la communauté, de bâtir des logements abordables ou sociaux, toutes les choses qui sont tellement nécessaires dans l'arrondissement, puisqu'on ne peut pas dissocier l'un de l'autre. On ne peut pas dire on a une vertu extraordinaire parce qu'on se bat pour le maintien du Y, mais c'est aussi le parc. Le parc offre des services au Y, est à l'appui des services au Y. Le logement social et abordable dans notre arrondissement, vous le savez très bien, vous et vos collègues, qu'il est absolument nécessaire. D'ailleurs, tout le monde a salué l'entente de 10 000 $ pour l'achat de cette propriété. Je ne répéterai pas vos propos. Tout le monde s'entend sur ces points. Donc, cette somme de 10 millions de dollars va permettre également au Y de faire des travaux dans le bâtiment, de maintenir sa programmation, mais aussi de soutenir tout le réseau montréalais. Ils sont dans une situation très, très, très difficile, surtout après la COVID. Je l'avais dit la première fois que je suis intervenue. Deuxièmement, le Y est un partenaire de choix de premier plan pour la Ville de Montréal. Nous le soutenons financièrement à hauteur de 3,8 millions de dollars annuellement, Madame la mairesse. C'est beau vos intentions de les soutenir aussi sur le plan de l'arrondissement, mais la Ville-Centre les soutient 3,8 millions de dollars par l'année. Et on les accompagne aussi dans un grand exercice qu'ils sont en train de faire de positionnement communautaire, de recherche des modèles adaptés aux communautés auxquelles ils travaillent et où ils sont implantés. Donc, tout délai ou refus d'approbation par nos instances risque de compromettre la transaction qui est faite de tout petits morceaux et ententes. Et j'étais très surprise en réalité par votre proposition qui a été appuyée de M. Perez, que vous avez appuyé, M. Rotran, que je trouve à la va-vite. Et le premier, quand je vous entends parler, ils vont quitter, mais ça manque de considération envers le Y, qui est une institution respectable, mais aussi envers leur vulnérabilité financière qu'ils traversent. Si vraiment vous avez voulu sauver le Y, les occasions étaient nombreuses. Vous aurez pu le faire sans compromettre en dernier recours ça. Vous nous avez pris du cours, Madame la mairesse, M. Perez et M. Rotran. Madame la mairesse, vous avez rencontré la semaine dernière le Y. Est-ce que vous leur avez demandé clairement que vous avez une intention d'engagement de 7 ans? Puis, si cette proposition que vous faites de 7 ans, elle est bénéfique pour les citoyens du WAIM, pourquoi vous ne l'avez pas discuté en amont? Pourquoi vous avez arrivé dernière minute, nous la mettre? C'est des jeux politiques, ça. Et puis, on s'entend que on avait, je sais qu'il y a eu une demande, Madame la mairesse, que vous avez faite pour un avis juridique. Et peut-être vous ne l'avez pas reçu, mais l'avis juridique, il est clair et j'espère que tout le monde, M. Perez, c'est un avocat. Nous n'avons aucun moyen, si disons ils vont quitter dans l'année prochaine, OK? On vote la résolution, votre résolution de 7 ans passe. Et l'année prochaine, le WAI plie bagage. Comment on va devoir les poursuivre parce qu'ils ont rompu la raison? Quel moyen vous voyez légalement et raisonnablement de les garder? Puis, si on avait, vous croyez, la possibilité de leur imposer une durée, ben nous, là, on leur aurait demandé 20 ans, pas 7 ans, 20 ans. Vous ne croyez pas qu'on l'a étudié, qu'on l'a mis de l'avant? On partage la même préoccupation que vous. Mais on n'a pas voulu manquer de respect envers un partenaire qui est absolument essentiel dans nos milieux, autant à NDG qu'ailleurs, là. Et je crois que ce qu'il faut comprendre de ce dossier, et ce que les citoyens et les citoyennes de NDG Côte-des-Neiges vont comprendre, qu'il faut mettre de côté ma façon dysfonctionnelle de fonctionner dans le conseil d'arrondissement. Ce n'est pas normal qu'on arrive dans des batailles politiques sur un enjeu sur lequel on s'entend. Tout le monde a à cœur la pérennité de NDG. Tout le monde. Puis, je tiens à vous assurer que les citoyens de CDN-NDG n'ont pas été défavorisés par Projet Montréal. Ils ont été défavorisés par notre incapacité de travailler ensemble, de travailler les dossiers en amont. Nous avons eu la lecture du dossier dans le caucus. Il y a eu normalement, il y a 10 jours entre le caucus, OK? On aurait pu s'asseoir, voir. Est-ce que vous avez balayé toutes les possibilités de garder le WAI le plus longtemps possible? Donc, moi, finalement, j'appelle à la raison à tout le monde parce que la position du WAI est claire. Vous mettez en danger l'entente qu'ils ont eue avec la ville. Il y a un montage financier qui est fait. Il y a un deadline aussi, il y a un délai qui doit être respecté. Donc, je fais un appel à l'ensemble des élus de trouver un terrain d'entente, d'être raisonnable. Et je vous affirme finalement que tout le monde veut garder les services du WAI le plus longtemps possible à NDG, 20 ans si c'est possible. Et s'il y avait une façon légale, votre résolution ne peut pas être utilisée pour les forcer à rester. Il faut aller légalement contre eux s'ils brisent l'entente. Merci.
Merci. Alors, M. Perez, votre réplique.
Oui, s'il n'y a personne d'autre qui aimerait prendre la parole, je vais faire le droit de réplique, Madame la mairesse. Donc, je vois qu'il n'y a personne d'autre, donc je vais commencer. Je pense qu'il est important, à mes yeux, de faire un petit rappel chronologique. Il y a beaucoup qui a été dit, qui a été soulevé par différentes personnes depuis lundi soir. Je vais essayer de m'attaquer à chacune des affirmations et je dirais même des accusations à mon égard, que je trouve ça très troublant et décevant. Je suis très fier de la façon que je fais la politique. Je pense que les 11 dernières années démontrent que je suis quelqu'un qui est rigoureux, quelqu'un qui est sérieux et qui s'attaque sur les choses de fond. Alors, lorsqu'on m'attaque, que ce soit par un post Facebook de mon collègue M. Arsenault, que ce soit par d'autres personnes du comité exécutif lors du conseil cette semaine, ou bien d'un tweet qui j'ai été surpris à cet égard de la part de YMCA Québec. Je pense qu'il est important d'avoir les faits. Parce qu'il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont été dites qui sont un peu loin de la vérité. Alors, première affirmation, c'est venu de nulle part. Hein? Cet amendement n'a pas été négocié à l'avance, c'est venu de nulle part. Ça aurait dû être négocié à l'avance. D'abord, je pense qu'il faut comprendre que moi, j'ai eu connaissance de ce dossier depuis exactement aujourd'hui 14 jours. Ça fait 14 jours que j'ai reçu un dossier pour étude en tant qu'élu de conseiller de Côte-des-Neiges de Trente-de-Grâce. Moi, je n'ai pas parlé au Y, ça fait 3 mois, 1 mois. Je n'ai pas accès comme les collègues de Projet Montréal dans leur caucus ou dans leur discussion avec la ville-centre, avec le responsable du comité exécutif ou le président du comité exécutif, le service des immeubles. Je m'excuse. Moi, je ne connais pas tout cet historique et il n'y a personne qui m'en a informé. Il n'y a personne qui m'a informé. Ce qu'on m'a dit, c'est voilà un dossier. On pense que c'est dans l'intérêt de Côte-des-Neiges de l'approuver. On va dépenser 800 000 $, la ville-centre donne la balance et on va pouvoir acquérir des terrains. On est d'accord sur le fond. On pense que les terrains, c'est une bonne acquisition. La ville-centre, elle se préoccupe évidemment, c'est normal, c'est son mandat, de logement social. Nous, on va penser logement social, on va penser parc, on va aussi penser impact sur la communauté au niveau plus micro. Ce n'est pas quelque chose que la ville-centre va se soucier. C'est à nous d'être le représentant de Monsieur Tout-le-Monde à NDG. Alors, je pense qu'il y a cet aspect qui est important. Deuxièmement, suite à la demande, à la rencontre de ça fait 2 semaines, j'ai demandé de la formation supplémentaire. J'ai demandé est-ce qu'on peut avoir l'évaluation foncière, est-ce qu'on peut avoir l'évaluation immobilière du marché et est-ce que je peux avoir les documents, notamment des actes notariés, parce qu'ils n'étaient pas inclus lorsque je les ai reçus. Vous savez quand j'ai reçu toute cette information? Je l'ai reçu vendredi avant le conseil d'arrondissement. 72 heures avant le conseil d'arrondissement, j'ai finalement eu la chance de tout recevoir en après-midi et j'ai pris le dimanche à lire de fond en comble. J'avais déjà eu discuté avec mes collègues. On avait une préoccupation quant au futur de NDG dans NDG. On avait reçu quand même des courriels à cet égard. On m'a informé, je n'étais même pas au courant qu'il y avait une pétition de 2000 personnes à cet égard. Alors, essayer de faire croire qu'on a effacé une va-vite, qu'on est de mauvaise foi, je le rejette absolument. Et je trouve ça disgracieux, notamment que M. Arsenault me l'a attaqué personnellement. Deuxièmement, il faut comprendre que la ville-centre et l'arrondissement, ce sont 2 entités complètement différentes. Ce n'est pas parce que le Y a parlé avec la ville-centre, avec le comité exécutif, que le conseil d'arrondissement agit comme un rubber stamp. Je m'excuse, on a une certaine autonomie, on a le droit de l'exercer. Et tout ce qu'on a fait, tout ce que j'ai fait, c'est selon les règles. Peut-être c'est à la ville-centre de présumer qu'on allait voter aveuglement comme eux ils le voulaient, parce que c'est ce qui est habitué à Projet Montréal. Je m'excuse, je suis un élu d'une autre formation politique. On a 2 indépendants, M. Rotran et Mme Montgomery. À part ce qu'il nous a donné, je ne peux pas parler des discussions en tant que de la mairesse, mais moi, je me base sur ce que j'ai devant moi et des discussions. Il n'y a personne qui m'a contacté. Il n'y a personne qui a pris le temps de dire, ben, peut-être, vous savez, ça vaut la peine d'en parler, c'est un enjeu aussi important. Non. Ils pensaient qu'on allait l'accès. Alors, dès que moi, en fin de semaine, 1 ou 2 jours avant, j'ai toute l'information, je l'étudie, je dis, j'ai problématique. Qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire? On avait parlé avec Mme Montgomery, avec M. Rotran, et on a dit, c'est quelque chose sur lequel il faut qu'on réfléchisse. Et ça a été préparé le lundi. Mais ce n'était aucunement une question de faire un enjeu politique comme l'a été affirmé par Mme Magda Popianou. Et je pense que Ce qui est important, c'est on veut tous la même chose, c'est comment y aboutir. On entend maintenant plusieurs choses de la part de mes collègues de Projet Montréal, comme quoi l'entente est en péril. J'aimerais savoir si, trop tard, on est en droit de réplique, mais moi, je n'ai pas entendu dans les commentaires s'il y a eu des discussions depuis lundi avec le Y de leur part sur cet enjeu-là. Je pense qu'il est aussi important de souligner que lorsqu'on nous donne une lettre pour dire on est là pour le long terme, hein, si ça fait partie de façon indirecte du deal, parce que si ça ne fait pas partie du deal, on n'a pas besoin de lettre. On fait tout simplement une transaction pour les terrains sans autre condition. Mais ce n'est pas ce qui a été fait. On nous a donné une lettre pour faire croire, donner l'impression, de bonne foi, j'en doute pas, qui dit on va continuer à donner des services. Pour combien de temps? On ne peut pas le dire. Jusqu'à quand? On ne veut pas s'engager. Pour moi, ça, c'est un drapeau. Si on ne m'avait pas parlé de cette lettre, si on n'avait pas parlé d'une volonté du Y de continuer à offrir des services, ça serait une autre paire de manches. Mais ce n'est pas le cas. Alors, une fois qu'on commence à dire qu'il y a une considération, il y a un échange qui vient en partie avec le fait qu'on va avoir le Y pour dans le futur, ce qui laisse croire, présager des années, sinon des décennies dans le plus, on a le droit de le questionner, on a le droit de poser des questions et d'exiger des choses. 7 ans, c'est très raisonnable. Il y en a qui vont dire, comme Mme Popiano, ben on aurait pu demander 20 ans. Ben, si elle veut faire un amendement pour faire 20 ans, ben moi je suis prêt à l'écouter. Mais pour les mêmes raisons qu'a été soulevées par M. Arsenault, on ne sait pas ce qui va arriver pendant les 5 prochaines années ou les 7 prochains mois. C'est vrai, mais il y a quand même le Y qui a un plan stratégique qui a fait parler qu'ils ont une évolution, une vision sur ces enjeux-là. Alors, je pense que 7 ans, on ne demande pas la lune, on veut une indication formelle. On veut quelque chose de concret qui va rassurer la population, qui va rassurer le conseil. Le conseil qui dit on a des fonds publics et on veut cette rassurance parce que la population nous interpelle là-dessus. Comme l'a souligné M. Rotran, il y a toujours la possibilité que si jamais on ne veut pas notre accord, ben, que la ville-centre paye pour les 800 000 $. Et là, on aura un débat sur le futur, lorsqu'il y aura quelque chose à décider. Deuxièmement, je pense qu'il est important de souligner, c'est que c'est un terrain qui peut être vendu à un autre prix, un meilleur prix pour le Y, et le Y, il voulait seulement traiter. C'est ce que je comprends. Oui, comme a été souligné par une des questions, il est zoné pour des équipements loisirs et sportifs, pas pour du résidentiel. Techniquement, un promoteur peut l'acheter. Il peut l'acheter avec le risque sur le fait que peut-être, oui ou non, il y aura un changement de zonage. Ce changement de zonage, contrairement à ce qu'a voulu insinuer M. Peter McQueen, il faut que ça passe par un vote au conseil. Et seulement s'il y a un vote au conseil, est-ce qu'il y a des enjeux de référendum? Est-ce que je sache, la loi a été changée, mais nous, on n'a fait aucunement un changement. Donc, c'est vraiment caduc de soulever cet enjeu. C'est vraiment faire peur à la population. Donc, il n'y a pas de 36 preneurs. Et si jamais il y avait un promoteur qui voudrait l'acheter, c'est garanti que le Y va recevoir moins d'argent. Parce qu'il y a ce risque. Il y a un prix pour ce risque. Alors, moi, je trouve ça intéressant. Les élus de Projet Montréal et maintenant M. Arsenault, ils ont voté contre l'amendement. Je respecte. Ils n'étaient pas au courant. Moi aussi, je n'étais pas au courant. Mais ensuite, ils ont voté pour la décision. Ils disent, on espère que c'est bon. Je me rappelle, M. Arsenault, il m'a interpellé. Est-ce que tu as un avis juridique là-dessus? Non, j'en ai pas besoin d'avoir un pour proposer quelque chose. Est-ce que M. McQueen a soulevé l'enjeu d'un avis juridique? Moi, je ne l'ai pas reçu à date. Ça fait quelques minutes que je parle, donc je ne sais pas s'il y a du nouveau. Mais c'est un peu à côté. Je peux vous garantir, si je veux trouver un avocat pour trouver un avis juridique qui dit le contraire, c'est potentiel, c'est faisable. Mais c'est vraiment à côté. Ce qu'on veut, et le message que je veux envoyer au YMCA Québec, c'est qu'on est là pour travailler avec vous. Peut-être vous avez été mal informé par la ville-centre. Peut-être vous ne connaissez pas la gouvernance de Montréal. Mais ce n'est pas parce que quelque chose est négocié au central qu'automatiquement le conseil d'arrondissement doit dire amen et aller suivre. Peut-être qu'il y avait un peu de terrain à aller faire pour parler à chacun d'entre nous. Moi, très souvent, j'ai des personnes qui me contactent pour des enjeux, si c'est aussi important. Je comprends, dans un monde corporatif, peut-être ce n'est pas évident. Mais ce qu'on veut, on veut pouvoir aider le YMCA. La ville est gagnante en faisant cette acquisition d'un terrain quand même appréciable dans NDG qui va nous donner des possibilités d'espaces verts, de parcs, de logement social. Ça va aider le YMCA à renflouer leur caisse dans un temps difficile. Ils ont toujours les terrains des bâtiments. Est-ce qu'ils vont être là pour 1 an, 6 mois? On ne sait pas. Mais si on veut interpeller un fonds public, un organisme public comme la ville, et dit « Ne vous en faites pas, on va rester avec vous », alors là, ça nous permet de parler là-dessus. Et lorsque je vois qu'il y a un genre de ça met en péril, peut-être ça met en péril, ça ne met pas en péril de notre côté. Alors moi ce que j'invite, c'est le why, qu'on ait des discussions pour voir, une fois qu'on se comprend, qu'on ait un peu plus de communication, pour voir quelle est la solution. Parce que moi, je suis en mode solution. I had the opportunity in the last couple of days to have a phone call with the CEO of YMCA Quebec. A very brief conversation. I'm not going to get into the details now, but some of the affirmations that I've heard from my colleagues are not exactly, some of the things are not exactly what I've heard. So I'm going to leave the door open and say, I'm ready to continue discussions. Let's try and find a win-win situation. But for Projet Montréal, 3 days after, not even the day after that they in fact voted in favor of this amended deal, to demand a special counsel to simply debate it again, to apply pressure without any new information, I'm sorry, it's just amateurish on their part and shows the lack of seriousness. Come back with something concrete. Come back with something that you have to propose. Speak to us ahead of time. But to try and put media pressure, public pressure, I'm sorry, but that's what it is, playing politics. So I'm going to, avoid all that. I'm going to go to the essence, and let's try and find a solution that will be able to satisfy this council, which is duly elected, duly represents its population, and is autonomous from city center. I look forward to having these discussions. Merci, Madame la mairesse, et j'appelle le vote sur la motion. You're on mute, Madame la maire.
Votre micro est fermé.
Aïe, aïe, aïe. C'était une longue journée. Bon, je vais appeler chaque conseillère. C'est plus facile pour Maître Reeves. Alors, M. Perez?
Oui.
M. Arsenault?
Yes.
Mme Popiano?
Contre.
M. Rautran?
Oui.
M. McQueen?
Contre.
Et moi, je suis en faveur.
So it's 4-2 is the final vote? Le vote final est 4-2?
Oui, 4-2
moi.
et Mme Montgomery, vous votez.
Oui.
Vous ne vous abstenez pas.
Alors, avec ça, je lève la séance et bonne soirée tout le monde.
Merci
Merci.
beaucoup.
Merci.
Bye bye.
Et bonne fin de semaine.